All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to a very special live stream that I'm hosting here on my YouTube channel. And today is going to be special because we have assembled a fantastic group of panelists to really analyze and dissect exactly what is going on in the US and China relationship. And I'm going to go ahead and bring these analysts in one by one. We're going to give them an introduction as we set up for a very interactive live stream. So make sure that you drop some comments down in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. This is going to be an amazing show. Really, really excited. So I'm going to start here first with Mitch Presnick. Mitch is a fellow over at Harvard University. Mitch, I know that you were the founder of the Super 8 hotel chain in China. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. And I know that you've spent, well over, 3 decades in China, a tremendous amount of China experience. So we're really looking forward to having you share your insights on the channel today and what's going to be a very interactive live stream. Very excited.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we've got next is Arnaud. Arnaud is, if you follow him on Twitter, I think many of our followers here do. Arnaud, you are my favorite geopolitical analyst that I follow on Twitter. You have an amazing, amazing ability to dissect a lot of the, complex geopolitics around the world. You have an incredible following there, over 328,000 followers now on Twitter. And you're originally from France, great entrepreneur. And I know that you run a great online business in the traditional Chinese medicine now. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cyrus. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And our fourth guest that we have here is Wang Zichen. Zichen, I know that you are visiting Princeton University right now, and I think this is so important right now that that we have someone from China on the channel to really share the Chinese perspective and to really bring some balance here, but also some really good perspectives. I know you're going to bring some interesting, viewpoints. And Zichen, I'm a huge fan of your newsletter. I believe it is Pekinology. It's the largest Substack newsletter written in English by a mainland Chinese person. Did I get that right?
Well, I think so. And it's great to be here, Cyrus. And happy to see you again, Mitch, and also see you online, Arnold. And I'm excited to look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also win best dressed today.
Yeah, I was wondering, did I overdress for this?
You know what?
I think we underdressed.
Oh, we underdressed.
We definitely underdressed, but you know what? We're back to our COVID protocol here, just kind of sitting down and getting comfortable here. But guys, this is going to be just an interactive live stream. So, I mean, if you've got comments, I want you to drop them down in the comments, send them in if you've got questions. And it's really just going to be, four friends chatting about this. Between all of us, we have a tremendous amount of experience, living, working in China, and all of us are very passionate about this relationship. And so let's go ahead and get started on our conversation today because, the world has changed tremendously in the last 5 to 6 weeks. Obviously, Liberation Day, April 2nd, is when Donald Trump started, really escalated this trade war and really, tariffed the entire world. It was really an unprecedented move. Mitch, I want to get your opening thoughts on, where we are right now in this trade war. And, kind of as I know we have this is actually the most important weekend right now when we have, Chinese and American officials meeting in Switzerland, talking about a potential deal. Trump's tweeted out yesterday that a lot of progress has been made. A lot of deals have been signed. Very vague. We don't know exactly what's going on, but give us your thoughts from Harvard University this morning.
Sure. First of all, happy Mother's Day to any mothers listening and everyone, and happy Mother's Day to my mom out there who's probably listening. So this is not a trade war alone. To me, this is a reset. This is a complete rebalancing. The relationship went through the engagement era, and then it went through a short sojourn, attempted to go into the decoupling era. That has failed because it's just not feasible for either side to decouple from the other. So now we're in this area. I believe we're going towards something called strategic leveraging, where China will be leveraging U.S. strengths and U.S. will be leveraging Chinese strengths. I think that, the fact is, since this trade war began, if you will, trade to the U.S., or at least exports to the U.S., have gone down by about 20%, I think. But on the other hand, China's exports overall have risen by 9%. So, I mean, so what we're seeing is a rationalization, but also a realization that, China doesn't really need the US as much as a lot of American leaders thought they did. And so now that's actually a good precursor toward getting toward where we need to get to, which is what I believe is a new paradigm in this relationship. And I believe it's not going to be so much, but look, the bottom line is total trade between the US and China last year was about $660 billion. Now that's on a combined GDP for the two economies of about $48 trillion. That's about whatever that is. It's a very small percentage. So when we get freaked out about trade as much as we do, and yes, there are a lot of jobs at stake on both sides, but this is a lot bigger than the trading relationship. The fact is that the U.S. multinational revenues in China exceed 6 times our exports to China. And that's not a well-known fact, but it is very relevant because that's exactly where the U.S.'s bread gets buttered. It's in, it's our ability to project economic power abroad. U.S. GDP may be about a quarter of global GDP, but if you combine the revenues of the Fortune 1000 from the U.S., it adds about another 20% to global GDP. So, compare that to post-World War II USA, where we controlled in the U.S. about 50% of GDP. I would argue that multinationals from the U.S. plus U.S. GDP together equal almost that amount. So it's still a very consequential thing that American multinationals are doing so much business in China. And there's no way around the fact that American leaders see that and will be reminded of that by the lobbyists in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great opening statement there, Mitch. And I always like to check our comments here because it's always interesting to see. We've got Sandy, who asked a question: who's going to pay the tariffs? This is an interesting thing that I've noticed in America. Is I've had a lot of people that I've talked to that are just not even familiar with this. That the fact that it is the United States business that is paying the tariffs, right? It is very much the United States consumer that is ultimately going to have to bear the responsibility of these tariffs. We're really going to start to see this happen. I think an interesting perspective that I've heard is, China got hit hard first because of the factories, right? Factories have slowed down, orders haven't come in as much. So China essentially gets hit harder first in the beginning. But right now, as we know, these container ships are not coming over to the United States right now. So I think we're going to start to see a crunch of supply chains here in the United States. I think we're going to start to see store shelves potentially start to empty and not have that inventory as we really start to see this compound effect. And I think that's why you have the US and China in Switzerland right now trying to figure out a deal here. Arnaud, I want to go to you. I want to, get your insights into, maybe, you'd ask a question in our chat, earlier, like, let's talk about the why. Why is Trump doing this? Is it really trying to target China? What is his ultimate game plan here? And I'd like to get it from your perspective as a European and what what Europe is thinking of, because I think Trump has somewhat alienated himself and the United States on the international stage. I'm not sure how the Europeans think of us right now, but I'd like to get your perspective on this.
Sure. The why is always very difficult to understand, especially with Trump, because of course you can listen to his words, but it sounds so strange, so bizarre as a rationale that you're almost forced to think, okay, there must be another explanation here. Because if you listen to him, basically the whole world is taking advantage of the US and it views trade deficits as a loss. But as Mitch was just mentioning, if you take Apple, for instance, when they make their iPhones in China and bring them to the US, so according to Trump, that's a loss. But at the end of the day, it's still an American company, an American product, the iPhone. It's still Apple, extracting the most value from the sale of an iPhone, right? The real value in a company is, the R&D, the brand, the intellectual property, all of that. Like the manufacturing of it is actually extremely thin margins. That's not where the value resides. Kind of paradoxically, that's China has arrived to this conclusion. And the real story of China today I think what Xi Jinping has realized is that we can't go on being the factory of the world for forever, because those are there is not a lot of value there. We need to rise up the value chain and build our own brands, build Chinese brands, like car brands and tech companies brand and so on, to capture more of the value. So it's almost a bit like China and the US are taking opposite journeys, where China is realizing we need to compete directly with companies that used to be our customers before, like the Apples or the car companies and so on. On the US under Trump, it's almost like they're regressing, and they're like, okay, we have this lead, is all the end of the value chain, but we want to divert our focus from that, and we want to go back to doing manufacturing, which we strategically divested from a couple of decades ago. So that makes little sense to me. I mean, from an economic standpoint, it makes little sense. So that's why I'm thinking there must be another explanation behind that. And I think probably the explanation has to do with deals. At the end of the day, it's just a leveraging tool that Trump is using in order to extract deals that would be more favorable to the US, and setting up some sort of a new order. I think the Trump administration understands that the world order is shifting. We're entering a multipolar world, and with these leverage that the tariffs gives him, he wants to enter, kind of negotiate America's position in this new world order. That's the best explanation. That's the most rational explanation that I can see.
Yeah. No, that's a great insight. Absolutely. I mean, I think the interesting thing with Trump is that no one really knows exactly what he wants to do, how he's going to do it. It changes so quickly. Even here on YouTube, it's been very difficult to make videos about this, because the problem is things change within a day, and he just kind of flip-flops back and forth. And I think right now we're starting to see a lot of signs. I mean, at least in my opinion, I feel that they don't have a very good game plan. I think, for example, I don't believe it's sustainable for the United States economy to go down this road. I mean, like you mentioned, we shifted away from this model decades ago. We're not a manufacturing country anymore, and it's kind of ludicrous for me when you've got not Scotty Bessent, what is it, Howard Lutnick, saying, we're going to build these amazing iPhone factories. We're going to get all these Americans, just give them manufacturing jobs to
the tiny screws, right?
yeah. I mean, it's like what the problem is if you own a business in America right now, the hardest thing is finding people that want to work. That is your hardest task right now. So yeah. I mean, people are not going to want to work in factories. That's just not the case. And we even see that in China, right? Like younger Chinese people are not wanting to work in factories anymore, right? I mean, this is shifting. It's a very interesting thing. But Zichen, I'm so excited to have you here on the show. I mean, I want you to bring in the Chinese perspective. So kind of, this is an interesting one. I mean, you're studying, you're about to graduate, I think, on your advanced degree from Princeton University. You are a very, very interesting scholar that writes a tremendous amount of work on the U.S. and China. Kind of give us your thoughts, from the Chinese perspective, what China is looking at this point, and certainly going into this trade negotiations this weekend in Switzerland.
Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me here, and you have gathered a great panel here, and so I think today is Sunday at the time of this recording, and the Chinese and the U.S. team are still talking in Geneva, Switzerland. This is the second day of their negotiations, and yesterday, which is Saturday, there was a bit of misinformation. Like, I think in the middle of the talks, there was, I don't know, where exactly does misinformation originate, but for quite a few hours on Twitter and including on Chinese social media, everyone was talking about, like there was a breakdown of the talks, but apparently there wasn't. So first of all, I think at least I'm personally, as an individual, like currently a student, but before coming here, I was with a non-governmental think tank in China, so I'm not representing the Chinese government here or anywhere else.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing that they are talking, and it's a good thing that the talks didn't break down as many alleged online yesterday. And I think you mentioned that there was this tweet from President Donald Trump, and I totally agree with you. I don't think maybe I don't see there is a U.S. plan or very concrete objective of what the United States current administration wants to achieve there. But I'm comforted in the fact that he said, great talks were happening, and he is happy with the negotiation. And he said a very good meeting today, which is yesterday, and with China and Switzerland, many things discussed, much agreed to. I guess we will wait to see on that. And
Right.
a total reset negotiated in a friendly but constructive manner. I guess from the Chinese perspective, like the tariffs slapped on Chinese exports, ever since President Trump came to the office for a second time, there was first 20 additional percent on top of existing tariffs, which were already quite high.
Right.
And his reason for imposing those tariffs were basically China wasn't doing enough in terms of controlling, precursors of fentanyl, and which admittedly, fentanyl is a huge problem here in the United States.
Right.
But during the first, during the Biden era, China and President Biden, had pretty good, interactions on the issue. And, the U.S. official in charge of narcotics went to meet with Chinese public security officials. So there was productive collaborations between the two. So from the Chinese perspective, that you just came into the White House, you slapped 20 percentage points on Chinese exports. That's not very fair in the Chinese eyes, and it's also like a negation of the prior commitments made by the U.S. government, admittedly on a different president. And then on and after the so-called Liberation Day, President Trump basically tariffed, I think, most of U.S. Major trading partners, and of course China bore the brunt of the attack. And China, I think, out of the expectation of the current United States administration, retaliated rather swiftly. And so now the tariffs are basically as we speak now, it is basically an embargo now. So I think there were news reports that there was zero ship departing Chinese ports to come to the United States. The economic consequences will be huge.
Right.
For the United States, but also for China, because the U.S. is 14% or 15% or 13% of as a percentage of direct export destinations for Chinese businesses. That's not a lot, and China has cut its exposure to the U.S. market for the past, 6 or 7 years. But still, it is a significant market, and here you will see, shelves will grow more and more empty, and stuff will get more expensive. So I think it's very good that the two countries, after back and forth, signaling, re-signaling, who is going to blink first, and and they are finally sitting down to talk, and that they are talking is a good thing. The Chinese always believe that equal dialogues based on mutual respect, based on sincerity is a way for major countries, especially the United States and China, to try to sort it out. The U.S. has its grievances, and in my personal understanding, some of the complaints from the United States are not totally illegitimate, and but just suddenly slapping 145%, and at some extreme cases, I think it's now 245%, tariffs on Chinese exports.
Right.
It's not justified. It's very abrupt. It was very abrupt, and it does very little to help the Americans. And so I really hope that they can come to. Perhaps it's gonna take a while. Like they will come to some sort of agreement to phase out the tariffs. I think one core demand from the Chinese side is I don't know, suspension or cancellation of the tariff, of the additional tariffs. If
Yes.
not all of them, then maybe most of them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that we're at a very interesting point in this tariff war, because I do feel that we are just a few weeks away from total chaos in the United States economically. I mean, I feel very strongly about that, as far as you can just simply look at these container ships, right? If we don't have these container ships coming, bringing the inventories that we need. And, Mitch, I want to go back to you to talk about this, because I'm starting to see a lot of small business owners that are getting crushed here in the United States. I've got a good friend of mine, for example, that's launched this new pool toy company. He's made this kind of little surfboard with squirt guns that you can, very fun pool toy. And obviously it's made out of plastic and foam. So there's really only one place that you're going to be able to manufacture that at scale. That's in China. So, this is kind of a side hustle that he was working on. And then now he's been hit with these massive tariffs. And so it's like, wow, this is completely ruined my profit line. I have no ability to sell this at a profit, with 145% tariff. And I think we're going to see a lot of small businesses, that are being tariffed. And again, this goes even beyond US, China. I was watching another coffee executive who is a small business owner here in America, saying that, look, where I import coffee from, of course, China's not a coffee growing region. So it's other regions around the world, all close to the equator, multiple countries that he's built up these relationships with. And they're getting tariffed as well. Even the 10-20% tariffs are really affecting his business, and really putting a significant amount of strain on his profitability and his ability to survive. Mitch, what do you think right now with this? Do you feel that the United States called this meeting in Geneva to because they realized that things are about to get very dire here? I mean, do you see that this is a little bit of panic from the United States, and that we're going to have to see Trump's team almost shift away? They're going to try to have to save face, right? I mean, the 145 is just unsustainable. What is your thoughts about this negotiation, and what do you think is going to happen after this weekend?
I actually have read The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. I read it while I was a graduate student at Peking University. And this is exactly out of his playbook, right? He tries to create massive pressure, throw a petard right into the room, let it blow up, and then see what happens. He's trying to create a change. A couple of points. I disagree a little bit with the idea that reindustrialization is a lost cause. I think that labor-intensive reindustrialization, definitely, but advanced manufacturing, the U.S. still manufactures about 10% of its GDP comes from manufacturing.
Yeah.
It's down from 20%. It's half of the G7 average, and it's much lower than China and Korea. But it's still very much in need of a rebalancing anyway. I think that 1% of tariff increase equals a 2% reduction in overall trade, right? So when you get to 50%, you're effectively at embargo. So everything else is just for show. So let's not forget that this is all about. The other thing is this, and I don't think you guys may be missing this point. I think that these tariffs are not really intended, as much as it sounds like. It sounds very politically expedient to say it's intended for China and to hurt China and whatever, but it's actually intended for boardrooms in Fortune 500 companies in the US, forcing them to rethink their supply strategies, because there's no way that they're going to put out the capex required to reindustrialize or even take some percentage of their supply and manufacture in the US willingly. US loves low capex business, and so far we've been able to enjoy that for 30 years.
Right
now that pendulum has swung too far. It has to swing back a little bit. On the fentanyl thing, 200 Americans die every day from fentanyl overdose. So I mean, let's put this in human perspective. And where are those deaths? They're in the Rust Belt. They're in towns that are dying. 25% of a lot of population in some of these small towns are addicted to something or another, opioids or fentanyl or whatever. That's what he's doing. He's playing to a domestic audience. As much as we want to say this is all about Trump and he's missing it, Trump can read the room, man. Whatever you think about him, he has read the room better than any. Biden was talking about quads and talking about security arrangements while we were adding $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. The ship was sinking and he was sitting there playing a violin. I don't understand why, whatever else you say about Trump or whatever you think about the strategy, the fact is we were on an untenable path in the US, and he was probably right to say this isn't going to work and we got to do something else. Now, we can talk about whether this was the right strategy or the wrong strategy, but the fact is I actually totally agree that there was a need for a reset in the US-China relationship. And I also believe that trade isn't the main story. Remember, Japan and Korea, when they were at this stage of development where China is now, that's when their multinationals started to go abroad. That's when they started to build huge factories in the US, Honda, Toyota, everybody in Germany, South America. That's when these guys went multinational. Chinese companies are now going multinational. BYD and Huawei and all these other guys would love to invest in the US. They've made it clear. NIO, I was actually with the CEO of NIO USA. He made it very clear they're dying to invest in the US. They all are, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it without having some political impetus both in China and the US to do that. And how do you get there without breaking some eggs? You're not going to be able to get this done without some disruption. So I mean, if you look up close, what you're seeing is collapse. You're seeing crisis. You're seeing a lot of problems. But if you, as they say in Chinese, 退一步海阔天空, right? If you step back, what you see is a different picture. I think you see a picture that this is a re-rating. This is a reset. This is a complete rebalancing. And it was a necessary rebalancing. So whatever else is happening, it's an evolution to me. And American multinationals are the intended recipient. And reindustrialization can definitely happen. China has dark factories. China has factories with 0 employees sitting in a factory. They're dark. They're running machines, running other machines, building machines like Terminator, right? So here we are now in this time where the US is going, all right, we're not going to reindustrialize everything, but the US lost 80,000 factories between 1995 and 2020. 80,000 factories. Every one of those was employing Americans in some little town somewhere. And now those people are trying to figure out what to do next. Granted, 90% of those factories are not coming back. That's true. So you guys are right. On the other hand, 10% could very well come back and should come back, frankly. And yes, we can't do any sort of advanced manufacturing in any scale here in the US, but with Chinese assistance, leveraging Chinese strengths, their capital, their know-how. I mean, I was there in China in the 80s when we started doing this the other way around. China was in the exact same position that we're in now. So, I mean, I'm a little more optimistic. I don't share the pessimism around the table. I'm not saying that I'm happy to see us having to go through this pain, but I mean, the question is, do you want to die of cancer or do you want to maybe die of chemotherapy? I'd rather go for the latter. I don't know. I haven't heard anyone give me a better option. And what Biden was doing, and and I'm not really very political, but I was sitting there watching in kind of, somewhat dismay while we were focusing on other things while this was the real issue. So.
Yeah, if I may jump in on
Please.
the reindustrialization thing, I think I totally agree with Mitch that first of all, let's be honest, like even some of those like lower end manufacturing, like China is already phasing them out. They are going to like Vietnam, they are going to Indonesia, they are going to Bangladesh, and like the sort of pay and the sort of like environmental implications is beginning to kick in and getting too much for the Chinese. And I really cannot foresee, as I guess Secretary Lutnick was saying, like, Americans will be happy sitting in some factories, turning the screws on some iPhones. And that's really, that's really difficult to imagine. And I'm sure you have seen some of the AI generated videos on Twitter mocking them. And that's the first thing. And secondly, as Mitch, who is a successful entrepreneur, pointed out, that there is still manufacturing in the United States, and I mean, against all odds, I think the news out of TSMC, the leading semiconductor, fab, actually their investments in Arizona, their U.S. plants, seem to be good, doing very good. That's the yield that they are able to have in the United States are pretty good, even compared to the local, yields in other factories by TSMC. So, of course, I think based on press reports, they went through a very painful process to have, Taiwanese engineers and American workers try to find how to work together. And it's a painful process for the United States. It's many Americans to work on long hours, multiple shifts a day, and maybe, I don't know, 996, 996. And so, but again, there is still some manufacturing in the United States, especially on the high end. And I think actually the Chinese are not opposed to the idea that the US should reindustrialize. You will find no such thing in Chinese government's, statements or, Chinese leader speeches, or even, I guess, Chinese scholarly research or commentaries in the Chinese think tanks, how to develop, how to reinvigorate the United States. That's a decision left to the American people and to the U.S. elected leaders, and they are free to do whatever they want. And if they want to reindustrialize, it doesn't, the Chinese do not have this philosophy that we can stop that. It's American choice. And as Mitch says, many Chinese companies really want to invest in the United States, and in the process, help with the reindustrialization of the United States. For example, I'm sure you've all heard of some sort of agreement between Ford, one of the largest automobile manufacturers, as well as CATL, the world's leading battery maker based in southeastern Fujian province of China, which is leading across all fronts in terms of batteries. But because of political position, because of various regulations, they have entered a very weird form of agreement, which is basically CATL was licensing its technology without actually putting money or Chinese personnel on the ground to help Ford, and even that has met political opposition. And there is another Chinese battery company called Gotion, Gotion, and they have a factory somewhere in the United States. They are also facing stiff opposition from local politicians and perhaps the communities. I mean, I can't imagine a battery manufacturing could bring any sort of national security challenge or risks to Americans. They're not linked with some central control in Beijing. It's just batteries, and in the process, they would transfer technology. They would share Chinese know-how and help recruit American workers, train the next generation of Americans. And the American workers, engineers, they could learn something from the process, because once you've lost the process for 30 years, 40 years, you just don't know how to do that. So, and Chinese automobile companies want to build in the United States. That's an open secret, and I don't see any Chinese government rejection of these companies' requests. Well, since the U.S. has levied so much very steep tariffs on China, so maybe there is some sort of political opposition in China. But if the two sides can come to an agreement, this is something that could be win-win for the two countries. And most importantly, I think, is if you examine the public remarks by President Donald Trump, he's open to the idea. He said it on the campaign trail. He said it at, if I'm not mistaken, at the first cabinet meeting, which was broadcast live on TV. And so he welcomes Chinese investment. I don't think he is very as ideological as many in the Republican establishment, in the national security or foreign policy establishment. He is an entrepreneur. He is a business person. He sees, he thinks he can make a very good deal, and he thinks these deals will be good for America. But there is indeed one disagreement from me with Mitch, is that I think President Donald Trump may be a little bit, let's not use the word naive, but I think he sees it in a too simplistic way. It seems that he believes by putting up the tariff barrier, that factor alone would be, not just necessary, but sufficient to force, manufacturing to go back to the United States. He apparently believes that, if it's like 145%, then the Chinese exporters, and by extension, Chinese manufacturers would have little choice but choose to go to the United States to invest. But manufacturing and as a part of development is something very, very complicated. And, I don't disagree with the fact that very high tariffs can be some sort of incentive. Let's be honest with that, right? Although it has dramatic, harmful effects on other fronts, but there's some sort of incentive. But on the other hand, you need to have people, which you have talked about. The U.S. job market is actually quite tight, and you have to have infrastructure which cut down the cost of logistics, of transportation. You need to have electricity. You need to have energy to power these plants. And on that front, I think President Trump is trying to basically release the potential of traditional oil and gas energy, but he's apparently not a big fan of renewable energy. And you need to have a workforce who is educated, who is willing to do that. I mean, these take very complicated, planning, coordination, and maybe not just at the federal level, but also, and because the United States is has such a fragmented power system, and so a lot of work has to be done, and maybe there should be some sort of, tax incentives and maybe state subsidies. And this is something I think President Joe Biden at least tried to do. He passed with the Inflation Reduction Act, and he put in quite some incentives to basically to pay to these domestic manufacturing to restart in the United States. And President Trump seems to be not a very big fan of these subsidies. And I don't know if legally he can, set aside those subsidies, because the legislation have been adopted by Congress, and the government is, by U.S. law, is supposed to basically distribute the money. That's not a choice to the executive. And but I do think he seems to be reading the reindustrialization of the United States as just too simplistically, and this is a huge effort, and importantly, China and other countries can help in the process. And the Chinese companies want to have its manufacturing close to its customers, and so that maybe people in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, they get to know, oh, my cars are made just 3 miles from my home. This is something I can afford. This is something apparently very good, and it's also something that I don't have any concerns for. And in the process, the Americans get better product, and maybe more jobs, and the Chinese companies make some of the money, and the bilateral ties are strengthened through these, all these business ties, including, I think, the businesses built by Mitch, by Arnaud. They are also a very important link between the two different peoples. So, and when it comes to the political feasibility of the situation, yes, there is significant, I guess, concerns and pushback and unwillingness across most of the U.S. Political and also, the deep state, if there is such a thing. But President Trump seems to be the number one leader, and he has able to shape. He has ability. He has a proven record of shaping the political, agenda of the United States. And if the two sides can find some sort of a solution, that is, potentially a very prominent area for some sort of collaboration and cooperation. And maybe President Trump can help bring it across the last mile. Yeah.
Can I just jump in one second?
Please.
I think to me, really is the key question, the question that puzzles me, and I'm not sure that I have an answer, is what problem is exactly is Trump trying to solve? Because I understand bringing back some manufacturing for extremely strategic industries that might adversaries or any country can sort of use as a leverage against you in tough geopolitical situation or a crisis like COVID, or really essential goods and so on, that if ever trade gets cut, like in a COVID type situation, it's important that you make at home. I get that, but a general let's become a China-like country, a factory-like country, a factory of the world ourselves instead of China. That I don't really understand, especially from Europe, and I think from much of the world. We look at the US and we see a country that is actually in a pretty good place because they control a lot of the top end of the value chain. Like,
Right.
if you look at probably the best entrepreneur of all time, Steve Jobs, when he revived Apple, he actually didn't say, controlling manufacturing, the detailed manufacturing of the iPhone is very important for us. He actually thought the exact contrary. He said that part, another contractor can do. What really matters for the value of Apple, and really what made Apple into a $1 trillion company, is the fact that they control the IP, the design, the brand, the marketing, all of this stuff, right? So I think that by now forcing companies like Apple or big American companies to come back on from that on start doing manufacturing again, they're going to put immense efforts into that, immense focus into that, right at the moment where China itself realizes, okay, that factory of the world model is very limited. The margins are thin. We need to control the top end of the value chain, and now they're putting all their efforts on that. And right at that strategic moment, the US decide to defocus from that on doing the manufacturing. So it feels like the wrong timing almost. If you see what I mean, like Apple is going to be busy, installing, manufacturing plants in the US, putting a lot of effort into that, right when you have, companies like Xiaomi and so on really figure out how to build a strong brand and internationalizing themselves. So it feels a bit strange. And another important aspect of that is that in this process, you almost get the feeling that Trump is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know if you have this expression in English. You have it in French. Okay, yeah.
Same one. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So he's losing a lot of goodwill in the world. It's very clear, especially here in Asia. I mean, we are seeing stuff we've never seen before, like Japan, for instance, which has always been, at least for the past couple of decades, geopolitically extremely close to the US, especially when it comes to China. I don't know if you saw, but recently they issued this joint statement of the Japanese finance minister together with the Japanese central banker, with the finance minister of China, South Korea, and the ASEAN countries. So all the Southeast Asia countries, countries like Indonesia, major countries, basically saying, due to Trump's tariffs, we're gonna, decide on a joint strategy together to focus on our region, on how to insulate ourselves from all these trade imbalances and so on. That's not good news for the US, clearly. And you see a bit of the same movement in Europe with regards to China as well. We just saw that the European Parliament has dropped sanctions on Chinese officials. China dropped sanctions on European Parliament officials. And it was those sanctions that led to the failure of the comprehensive agreement on investment that would have really put China and the EU closer together. So now it paves open the way again to, maybe talk about doing that agreement again. none of that is really good news geopolitically or economically speaking for the US. So he's, kind of forcing a lot of countries to de-risk themselves from the US, to see America as this very volatile country that can change so much, on which, if we are too close from them, there can be a lot of damage to us as well. So yes, I buy quite a bit of what Mitch is saying on Zichen as well. There is some need for some reindustrialization, but it needs to be more, I guess, thoughtful on what really matters strategically to have done at home, and not this whole movement, which I think is bad timing, and because of the scale and the brash aspect of it, risk really damaging the US, I think, and benefiting China.
Yeah, Mitch, go ahead and counter. I would like you to respond to that. I'd like to get your thoughts.
I'll just point out that China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan all industrialize under huge tariff barriers. Okay, guys. So before you throw them under the bus for this is exactly what everyone else has done. And also, it may not be the sole solution, but it's definitely part of a solution. I understand the arguments that tariffs are a blunt instrument. They don't make sense. Chemotherapy, guys, chemotherapy. It's not going to be a pleasant experience. But this is what happens when you allow the middle class to deteriorate for 45 years. The fact is that wages in the US have not increased on an inflation-adjusted basis since 1976. That's a fact. And
Right.
The fact is that we allowed ourselves to run up a $36 trillion debt. Ray Dalio said it's the number one issue facing the US right now. Look, I'll agree with you guys on a lot of this, that it's got to be done well. Trump and nuance are not usually words mentioned in the same sentence, all right? That's for guys like me to try to figure out, but that's what guys like me do well. That's what entrepreneurs do. We figure out, all right, we're the ones that make lemonade with lemons. So even if you don't like Trump tariffs, and if you don't like his tariffs or whatever, I heard a lot of people criticize that Trump is throwing tariffs on the rest of the world. Totally reasonable. And goodwill is really important, especially for the US, which has always relied on alliances and goodwill. And also, I'll even give you more, that the US is a platform. I started a hotel chain in China, so I understand something about platforms. If you took an independent hotel that was losing money in some little town in Guangxi province, you put it on my platform, I can give you a 20 to 30% IRR. That's what a platform can do. The US is one big platform. And I agree with you that manufacturing isn't a big part of that. On the other hand, if an economy becomes too over financialized, and China is the one that generates the world power on trade and manufacturing now, but the US is still the global leader in finance, in global finance.
Right.
Now, if you were to say to 100 bankers in Washington, we're over financialized, they would say, no, we're just the right amount of financialized. But if you go to Main Street, every single American would say we're over financialized. We're actually starting to cannibalize our own financial system. And that's not something sustainable. So you've got to create balance. Where do you create balance if it's not going to be with services versus manufacturing, or with finance versus trade and manufacturing? There's nowhere else to give. So if you want to, you've got an economy where 10% of the Americans here own something like 70% of all the assets in the country. I mean, the Gini coefficient is the highest in the world. How do you get around that? Well, manufacturing jobs, granted, we're not talking about high labor component manufacturing, we're talking about advanced manufacturing. But even so, even if you bring back a small percentage, even 5,000 factories, which probably, by the way, won't necessarily be American companies invested, but there'll probably be JVs. I've been arguing, and you guys know this, for 18 months. I was the first one to start coming out and say, we should be doing exactly what China did. If it's a strategic sector, we should be doing 50-50 JVs. We bring, our know-how, and they bring capital, and they bring all the advanced tech. I mean, I got so much heat when I published in August 24 in Harvard Business Review under my article, the four great strengths of the Chinese economy and what they mean for multinationals. I got so much heat when I said that China was leading in 53 out of 64 categories of critical technology. And now, of course, Eric Schmidt, who, is former, head of Google, he basically was one of the first major US tech leaders to come out and corroborate my information. Now it's common knowledge, but at the time it wasn't. And once you get to the point where you accept that, now what do? Even if it's not for manufacturing, you can't have a world power that doesn't have at least the ability to have self-sufficiency on some level in its own manufacturing. China would agree with that. That's why the leaders aren't complaining about it, because that's exactly what China would think, and it's exactly what China did. Now, are we going to become China, a factory of the world? Absolutely not. Is it going to be an American style of this, where just like our American auto industry was on the ropes in the 80s and 90s, and then Japan came in and started investing, and now Korean companies and German companies have come in and invested. And now we do have an auto industry here. It's not being driven by the big three the way it was. In fact, BYD, I don't know if you guys know this, but BYD, market cap of BYD is now greater than GM, Ford, Stellantis, and I think Toyota combined. It's just ridiculous. And Tesla is having a lot of problems. So our one bright spot is having some issues. So I hear what you guys are saying, but what's the better solution? You've got this set of problems, and he's acknowledging those problems. So what do we do? What else do you want to do?
Well, better solution. I think I agree with what you said. It's like the United States is not going to become the next China, become the world's factory floor. And also, I think part of the reason is because of the very unique thing about America, that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. And I think there is a commentator who just pointed it out in the comment section. And I'm sure Cyrus is a very experienced moderator, will respond to some of the questions over there to have a more interactive dialogue. And, the US consumes too much and saves too little. And the greenback is everyone's most trusted currency, the most trusted piece of paper on earth, although it costs, I think, 17 cents to print. You can print $100 on a piece of paper. So that's very unique, combination, the US of this status structurally makes it economically, if you are an economist, it's very difficult to have a surplus, some sort of scenario that President Trump would really want. And I think that's not advanced macroeconomics taught in Harvard, University, the Department of Economics, although there are 2 PhDs with Harvard PhDs in economics working at the White House now. And so structurally, that's something very difficult. But talking about the sort of potential solutions, as Mitch has just said, and maybe you were quoting, I think, maybe from Bernie Sanders and some people, the inflation adjusted income hasn't risen since 1976. I think domestically there is a redistribution problem here in the United States, and I think for the Chinese and for many other countries on earth, including very close US allies, for example, I think Japan, the Japanese prime minister said that no, 10% base tariffs is not acceptable to Japan. They want to get rid of all the tariffs. That speaks to the overwhelming global opposition to the new tariffs. There is I think many other countries see the United States is externalizing its domestic problems. Honestly, I spent 2.5 years, in Brussels. I was a journalist for China's state news agency. I was there. You go around the European continent, you ask every person now, is it controversial to have some sort of universal healthcare so that everyone can go see a doctor when things got unlucky for them? I'm sure that's not a controversial opinion in the European continent, and but somehow that's very controversial here in the United States.
Right.
The people do not have universal healthcare. I mean, even China, where the GDP per capita is 1/4 or 1/5, has some sort of state healthcare, which admittedly is still on a low level. It's not as good as the French and the German have, But for the United States to be such a wealthy power that do not give, basic public goods, including, healthcare, and the public schools are not doing very well, and the tuition at universities are very high. Although at the leading universities like Princeton, Harvard, they exempt a lot of tuition from students, but generally these services that the government is providing in Europe, where the stage of development is generally comparable. I think this is a core problem of the United States. Maybe Wall Street can continue to produce a lot of output in terms of economy and facilitate deal making and underwrite a lot of loans and IPOs across the world, but maybe tax them more, like tax rich people like Mitch, more, and contribute more to the less unfortunate people. I'm sure Mitch has been doing a lot of philanthropy in China and in the United States as well. That's just a joke. But I think distribution and redistribution, I think that's a fundamental problem that I don't see the mainstream US politicians are actually trying to resolve. I'm sure you've heard there is a book which is very popular in the past several months. It's called Abundance, and was written by two American scholars, and people talk about it all the time. But I still think that they don't talk about redistribution too much. When I was relatively young, I think when Barack Obama was running for president, there was this Joe the plumber who was saying basically spread the money around, and somehow that message has become toxic in U.S. domestic politics. And I do think I think the Chinese people, including the Chinese leaders, want to see a better United States, want to see a more, at least domestically a unified, not so divisive United States, because this is such a great country with a great, military. If domestic chaos and the disorder really erupt, leading to some very extreme choices in terms of foreign policy and national security, that's gonna have drastically harmful consequences for the rest of the world. I think for the US to have a more cohesive, to have an environment where people do not feel the need to basically lash it out on foreigners, on immigrants, that's going to be good for the United States and for its neighbors, for South America, for the Latino population, and for the rest of the world as well.
Yeah. I want to chime in here. So, Mitch, I think you brought in a really good perspective, and we've had a lot of interesting comments in the chat because, Mitch, we've had people say, Mitch, I 100% agree with you, and then someone followed up with, Mitch, you're un-American. You're not. So you have this very, very divided viewpoints, which is great because that's what the goal of this is, right? Our goal on this show is not to get everybody here to pat each other on the back and say, wow, you're amazing. Let's have dialogue. We're not always going to see on the same viewpoints here. I mean, I think it's interesting, Mitch, that you brought up the fact that we should be doing these joint ventures, right? Exactly like you said that China was doing back in the day, right? When American companies were going there, they were doing JVs and they were investing in China to really reindustrialize and build that economy. But I find it very hard to get there because I think we're going to have to do a huge pivot. In Western media, we know that China has been presented as the biggest threat to the future of the United States. I mean, this is I kind of see it very hard for Trump to pivot to that. And I mean, I'm going to bring up this this article that was published where it says over 25% of people in the U.S. say that Chinese Americans are a threat. A report found that 40% of Americans believe Asian Americans are more loyal to their countries of origin than the U.S., doubling since 2021. And I mean, this is a direct result of our media, and this is a big concern. I find this to be a very big story because I think here in the United States, we're seeing a rise of Asian hate crime. We're seeing the fact that, I mean, look at the brain drain that we're seeing in the United States university system where, unfortunately, a scholar like Zichen could potentially be targeted because look at his name. This guy's obviously from China. Is he working for the communist government? Is this guy a potential threat? But as we know, our country here in the United States is built on immigration. Our country is built on inviting the best minds like Zichen to come to the United States to contribute to our country. And I just find it very hard for Trump to be able to pivot and to say, you know what? Guess what? We're going to do a joint venture with BYD, right? I mean, we know everything. You know, look at the Tom Cottons, the Marco Rubios, the Gordon Changs, you know, that are just on all of these, but they're on the mainstream media. You've got Trump retweeting Gordon Chang like, this guy's right, you know, and this is just your China policy is screwed when you're retweeting Gordon Chang. I mean, don't get me wrong, I agree with you. I think we should be working with China. I would love to see a BYD factory built here, because quite frankly, I would go buy a BYD car. If I could have access to it, I would buy that hands down before I buy a Tesla. But I can't, we have no access to that. I think it'd be great, but I mean, wouldn't that be a difficult challenge? Wouldn't people be ringing the alarm bells like, oh, China, this is a national security threat? And I just don't see how Trump can actually pivot from, this anti-China rhetoric that he's been going down, and that we need to crush China. We need to, we're using this, I think it's much more beyond economics. I think it's more of a power play. China, the United States wants to be that dominant force in the world, where clearly we've shifted to a world of multipolarity. We've seen, like Arnaud pointed out, look at how these trade alliances are, forming, right? Japan, strategic geopolitically, has never been close to China anywhere, but Japan, Korean, Chinese leaders meeting in Tokyo saying, look, we are going to form a trade alliance to counter these Trump tariffs. Germany saying, look, if we cannot, strike a deal, we are going to pivot closer to China because we have to, right? Economically, I don't know. I see the United States. I don't see Trump's plan, working out at all. I don't even see Trump going the distance of 4 years. I think that this is just going to be a total disaster for the United States. I mean, look at, many of you might know, I lived in Canada for 5 years. My entire family is Canadian. We're dual US and Canadian citizens. I mean, the entire country of Canada is extremely pissed off. I mean, our tourism industry is going to get absolutely hammered this summer in the United States. Canadians are boycotting the United States right now. Here in Las Vegas, as many of you know, is a tourism destination. We are already laying off thousands of workers at the hotels, bellboys, valet staff, because tourism is down tremendously. We are not getting the Europeans across the board. Tourism from Europe is down 30 to 40%. That's every country in Europe. Canadians are not going here. Interesting enough, Canadian visits to Mexico is booming right now, up 25% this last month. So, Canadians are very happy to fly over the United States, go to Mexico, because they are boycotting the U.S. They are not happy with Donald Trump. And I don't see this in a good position for the United States at all. That's my opinion on that. So anyways, I'll let you guys counter that or add some comments onto that. But I love this discussion. This is what we're here for today. We're here to share some opinions and get the dialogue going. We have got a great chat going on here. Over 800 people here in the chat with us joining in for this Sunday. So whoever wants to respond to that, please do.
I mean, I'll take one crack. First of all, if I'm anything, I'm a capitalist and a patriot. I mean, look, Confucius had a lot of great quotes, but one great quote is, the first step toward wisdom is calling things by their proper names. So like, I've got to call a spade a spade. Like, I mean, when I see something, I don't care if it sounds positive or negative to the US, I'm going to say it, because how do you have a conversation about what you're going to do about a problem if you can't actually admit a problem? Like, right. When I mentioned that China was leading in so many areas of critical technology, I got crushed by a lot of people. They were just unwilling to accept reality, but right. Now it's accepted fact. So, I mean, things are that way until they're not. I mean, I'm a China owl, man. Like, half the problem the US has is that we have been using a binary mindset to think about problems that are not binary. They require nuance and understanding. I wrote an op-ed actually on a concept that came out of conversations with the great Lizzie Lee about, I said that the age of hawks and doves is over. It's time for the owls. And of course, our most prominent owl, we lost him, Dr. Kissinger, someone that I spent a lot of time with. And, whenever I think about what I'm doing, I always use him as kind of my guide in terms of how he would think through these problems, because this is the time for owls. This is the time for people that approach this like a scientist. I have no interest in ideology. And by the way, neither does Trump. Like, you talk about Trump, those people you mentioned, as soon as Marco Rubio got into office, he pivoted towards the center. He's no longer like super hawkish on China. Now the hawkish people like Rick Scott, and there's a few others, but I mean, Trump's not an ideologue. He's a guy that just wants to see something get done the way he wants to get it done. I don't defend him. I'm not even sure that, I mean, I agree with everything he does, but I can tell you this. He definitely read the room when he realized that the problems with the U.S. are not insufficient security or whatever. He realized we got a problem with middle class imbalance, with debt, with an over financialization. He understands, and he's trying to address these problems. He may be doing it in a very inelegant way, but I do think that, again, when you've got a patient on cancer, with cancer, what do? You've got to either just let him die, or you've got to give him chemotherapy, and it might be very painful. So it's hard to say right now what we're looking at. I do think that binary thinking that the hawks and the doves in Washington both share, which is all based on emotion and ideology, China's not approaching it like that. Well, I mean, we want to blame China for all the problems we've got here, but we can't do anything until we actually get to the point where we address Trump. I remember one time I was talking to Dr. Kissinger, and he said, the global implications are staggering. And, and I used to quote him to him. And I used to try to do an impression of him to him. And he always would say, that's not bad, but I've heard a lot better. But this was one of his best things. The implications, the global implications are kind of staggering, because we are in a full reset. This is what a reset looks like, guys. There's no way around it. It's going to look painful. It's going to look really scary, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but we don't know where it's all going. And to the idea that he doesn't have a plan, I don't buy that at all. I think the plan is to try to bring back some amount of manufacturing to the U.S., to try to force American multinationals to rethink their supply strategies to make that possible. I'm actually involved with that myself. I've got a team right now that we're working on bringing in medical device manufacturing into the U.S. and bonded free trade zone areas where we won't have to pay tariffs until that actually leaves the bonded zone, so that we can bring in Chinese equipment. We can bring in a Chinese partner, bring in their equipment that, they're manufacturing in China now. They're going to ship their machines over to the U.S. There's 100 companies that are looking to do that I'm talking to right now. There's probably a lot more behind it, because obviously if I'm going to be here at Harvard researching this, I'm going to commercialize it, because I'm an entrepreneur. What else am I going to do? And besides, I want to try to be the change that I want to see, to quote Obama. So I'm going to do all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have a lot of people. If I'm pissing off everybody, I'm probably on the right track. If people are calling me un-American, other people, there's just as many that are saying this is a true patriot. And I'm comfortable with it,
Yeah, for sure. Arnaud, I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, just to jump in, I think we're back to the question, what problem exactly are you trying to solve? So I completely agree with you, Mitch, on the problem. So this problem on the US being increasingly behind in technology, and China now leading in 54, or I think the latest is actually 57 out of 64 critical technology. That is a real problem. But I have the feeling that the hammer that Trump is bringing to the whole thing it will actually make that particular problem even worse, because how did China get there? Education. I think that's the key thing, right? And just looking at what the US is doing in education, both for its own population, I mean, it just, as far as I saw, abolished the Department of Education. That's one thing. Is going on a full-on attack against American universities. And the third thing is carrying a lot of very talented people who could come and study in the US, is deterring them from doing that. So none of these things go towards solving that particular problem. And I also 100% agree with you that if you want to compete with China in a lot of critical manufacturing, strategic manufacturing, and so on and so forth, then the pragmatic, logical thing to do is to learn from China, absolutely, by doing exactly what you were mentioning, enticing Chinese companies to come to the US, set up companies, doing that in JVs with maybe some technology transfers and stuff like that. but it's very much not the mood right now, right? On the contrary, Trump's actions, the tariffs, and so on, are more scaring Chinese companies from the US. It's like they see America's attitude to China as extremely hostile. So I think that you guys probably all have read Mao Koji's articles, which I shared on Twitter. It feels almost a bit like a bit of a cultural revolution moment in the US, where it is a pivotal moment. It is a reset. That's absolutely clear. But Trump probably represents more the reset than the new direction. So he marks the pivot, like there will be a before and an after him. But that's all he represents. And the solutions will come later. But I don't think that anything he's doing right now that I can see is that constructive to bring about the solutions to the problems that we all agree on America has.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I mean, I think the other thing that we need to, I mean, it's an interesting one, right? We've said we've hollowed out the middle class here in the United States. We've shifted all these manufacturing jobs, but the interesting counter to that is that, we have shifted these manufacturing jobs out because the simple reality is that other countries do it at a better price point and better quality. I mean, it's the same reason why, remember, I mean, that famous quote from Tim Cook, where he's doing that interview and he said, the reason why we're in China is, many people think we're in China because of the cost, right? And because it's cheap to manufacture in China. He's like, that's actually a myth, right? Manufacturing in China isn't necessarily that cheap anymore, right? We actually look at the stats. Manufacturing, wages has consistently gone up in China. It is not located as known as the cheap place anymore, but it's the tooling engineers, right? Tim Cook said, if we're looking for tooling engineers in the United States, we could fill a classroom of tooling engineers, but in China, we could fill multiple football fields full of these tooling engineers. It's a very, very famous video clip from Tim Cook that I think is really important. But I find, this is an interesting one, Mitch, where I really struggle to understand this because, in the United States, let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, we have a very lazy population that doesn't want to work. There's a great movie called American Factory where, this was produced by Obama, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago, where they actually follow this Chinese businessman who actually opened a factory in the suburbs of Detroit. This is a very interesting thing. And what it was is they were building
glasses, right? Glass.
Yeah, Fuyao
glass.
Fuyao glass, exactly,
it's
right?
all the Wang's business.
So they're manufacturing like the windshields for cars, and they've opened this factory. And what was interesting is there's two things that I remember very clearly from that film. The first one is they had gone to this small town that was built on manufacturing, and many of the employees there, they were on unemployment for 2 years, right? They hadn't had a job. They're just basically getting a basic unemployment check from the US government. And they said, this new company's come in, they've offered me $35 an hour to work in the factory, but that's not enough. I want something closer to $50 an hour. I mean, that's with my benefits and with this. And it's like, hey man, you haven't had a job in 2 years. Like, you have an offer for $35 an hour. Like, you should be jumping at that opportunity. And then, the simple thing is you watch these guys in the factory, and there's a great scene where basically a guy is taking the windshield and taking it from A and putting it to B. I mean, he's just moving stuff over. And there's a scene in there where the billionaire is walking through, the billionaire owner of the factory, Chinese business guy is walking through with his manager. And he said, oh yeah, see these guys over here? Yeah, we're going to replace these guys with robots, in the next, month or so. And so I don't know. I find that, I have an interesting perspective. For example, my father is in the construction industry in the state of Florida. Now, in the state of Florida, if you know anything about construction, there is a tremendous amount of workers in that industry from South America, right? Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras. I mean, it is basically impossible to run that industry. You cannot find workers that want to do that. You will not find American workers that want to do that. And so there's a tremendous amount of illegal workers in that industry throughout the state of Florida. Talk to anybody in construction. That industry would absolutely collapse if you don't have these workers, because quite frankly, Americans don't want to do the work. They're too lazy. So I mean, again, I think it is very, very noble to want to say, look, let's bring back some manufacturing. And I know you're saying, okay, maybe we can bring back 10%. Maybe we focus on the high-end manufacturing. But unfortunately, I think those jobs are gone. I mean, there's a reason why they've left the United States. It's just not simply competitive to be building stuff in the United States. I think it's shifted. I think that we have gotten to a point where other countries are much better. My most recent video here on YouTube, this is really interesting. I interviewed Tony from LC Signs. This is one of the most, right?
You did?
I love him.
Yeah. So
I just realized you did. That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's my most recent video. So Tony from LC Signs, he was here in Las Vegas attending the International Sign Expo, and so we had connected on WeChat. And he's like, hey, homie, it's your boy Tony. Come down to the convention center. And but what was amazing is this interview is that he's known for his comedy, right? He's known for his funny skits. But I have a very serious interview with him. We basically talk about trade war. We talk about business. This is a guy that started off live streaming on Alibaba with 20 people watching. And then he said, he's like, actually, for 6 months, we started making videos talking about my signs. Like, this is the quality. And what he did is then obviously he started doing the comedy versions, and he started really having a tremendous success. Long story short, that factory has now 4x. Okay, he's increased his capacity by 400%. He has gone from a worker in the factory to now a partner in the business. So a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit. But if you go to that video and watch that, but look at the comments from there, and you'll just see the amount of support of like, wow, this guy is as sharp as it gets. And it's the hustle, it's the drive. And even when I'm interviewing Tony, as you guys know, I show Speed. Speed was in China, right? 37 million subscribers. And in one of the greatest comments, he's like, notice Tony. The first thing he says, he's like, hey, Speed, I got you this sign. By the way, there's a 3-year warranty on this, right? He's dedicated to his craft. And, I think what's interesting here is, we have people commenting like, look, I get my products manufactured in China. I'm looking at the Chinese factories. I email them within 2 hours. I've got a response. I've got people on it. I can't get a response from an American factory in 2 to 3 days. People are lazy. I mean, I just don't see this happening in a large capacity. I don't know. I mean, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome, but I mean, I just don't see any policy that he's coming out with that makes us look good on the international stage. I think he's just seeing this. I think that he's leading the U.S. down a very difficult road where, unfortunately, I feel we're being alienated on the international stage. I don't think any country in the world is looking at the U.S. in a favorable position right now. I would challenge anybody to find me a country that's looking at like, Trump's doing a great job, America's getting made great again, things are going really well right now in the U.S. I don't see it. I might be wrong, but that's from my perspective.
Trump may be the wrong leader, guys, but he's definitely called the problem right. There's no question about it. Like, we got total imbalances in our system. The middle class is failing. For some reason, the U.S. decided around 1980, when Reagan came in, that the middle class, which was the goose that laid the golden eggs for the entire American economic miracle, was no longer important. That was all about the so-called job creators and whatever. To the question on why factories have left, the reason the factories left isn't because workers didn't want to work in factories. The reason they left is because multinationals basically jumped on the globalization bandwagon, and like we do in America, we tend to go to the extremes, and we didn't have a balanced view. Everything you guys are saying is right. I say there's nothing incorrect about what you're saying. It's truth. But truth without context, to quote Dr. Kissinger, is useless. And the context here is that there is a need for rebalancing. You've got debt that's 120% of GDP. You've got the inability to manufacture even strategic commodities in the United States. Forget about other things. And again, I don't doubt that we're not going to be doing Fuyao glass type of factories in the U.S., but we could absolutely be doing Xiaomi factories to manufacture, completely automated factories. Which when you've got some middle class jobs that are going to be created, and back office and admin and finance and all that stuff. You're going to have a lot of those. Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, Mao Keji, he's a good friend. Besides being a great commentator, he's an excellent cook. He made me the most amazing Chinese dinner, 5 courses. He whipped it up. I couldn't believe it. Like right in like the kitchen of his dorm right here at across the School of Engineering.
I can speak to that as well. His cooking is just tremendous. I think he used to intern at some restaurants and. Great cook. He's so for listeners, for audience who are not familiar, he's currently a visiting scholar at the Harvard Yanqing Institute, a very prestigious institution, and also he is pursuing a PhD at Tsinghua University, one of the best universities, the best universities in China, and he's actually full-time working experience. Is at NDRC. Well, Mitch was saying that because he comes from Beida, Peking University, and these are the top 2 universities in China. Right?
There you go. That's a little bit.
On probably the most impressive is the NDRC, which is the National Reform Commission of China, which decides on China's economic policies. That's probably
yes. That's where the industrial policy came out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I say on all of my programs, I Beida. I love Beijing University. I'm a proud alumni, and but definitely I think Tsinghua, Beida are the best. Look, there's 3 things the U.S. has to do. As we all know, they've got to restore some measure of manufacturing competency in the U.S. We've let that pendulum swing too far. Second, they've got to rebuild some critical supply chains. There's no way around it. We cannot operate as an advanced economy that has protection and security of over itself without having some agency over its critical supply chains. And we've lost all that again because of overglobalization and because we optimize for efficiency, not for resilience or long-term viability. Let's just be honest. The U.S. is not an economy that tends to do well on long-term thinking, and we drop the ball. And so we've got to fix that. The third thing we got to do is we've got to restore some technological competence. Now, for those 3 goals, all right, you're going to do them either with China or without China. You tell me which is going to be harder and more costly and which is going to be riskier. To do it without China is basically not impossible, but damn near impossible. We'd have to work with Japan, Korea, Germany, and the other, still industrialized countries within the G7. But none of them are anywhere near where China is at in terms of advanced manufacturing, robotics, advanced materials. China is leading everybody now in these things. So you're either going to do these things with China or without China. Whatever else is true, I know that those 3 things are true. And finally, this is all happening, guys, with the backdrop of the 4th industrial revolution, synthetic biology, AI, and everything else. It doesn't allow us to have the kind of binary thinking that we used to be able to get away with. Yeah, sure. Like in the Middle Ages, all the way through to probably like the 1960s, it was okay to think in black and white terms, like that commentator who commented on my patriotism. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to relegate us to the secondary league if we don't get out of it. I don't see any way we fix that problem. China and the U.S. are quite similar. I mean, I can tell you because I spent 30 years in China and 28 years in the U.S. And U.S. we have our American exceptionalism, and China has Tianxia, everything under heaven is us. And so there's so many similarities that. And a lot of the reason why we're having such a hard time with this question on U.S., China, and the trade war and why it's freaking everybody out, it's not necessarily because it's not necessary. It's because nobody else can figure out where they are until the U.S. and China figure out where we are. Because whatever you want to say, the U.S. and China form 2 halves of what is now what I consider the G2, right? And that's really that's the core of the core. And everybody else is gearing off of one or the other. So,
yeah. So, I mean, I could say 100% of your words. I agree with all of that, and especially on the need for China and the US to sort of learn from each other. I mean, well, especially more the US learning from China on manufacturing and so on. But again, I have a hard time seeing that the outcome of whatever Trump is doing is going to lead to that.
Agreed.
Because, I mean, if anything, is worsening the hostility with regards to China, and is coming back with his old China rhetoric around the China virus and stuff like that. And when you listen to Trump, he did say some of that during the campaign, like we need some Chinese factories here in the US, we need China to invest here, and so on and so forth. But since he got elected, I don't think he said any of that. And even J.D. Vance said, we don't want China to own a single inch of grass in the US. So, that's the extreme contrary of this. And what Trump is now doing is that the deal he's trying to make with China is for the US to sell more American products in China, when that's completely the wrong diagnostic. I think we all agree on this. The US actually sells, there are very little restrictions on American products being sold in China. I mean, you go to, I actually did a tweet yesterday or 2 days ago analyzing American cars being sold in China. If you take a brand like Buick, for instance, they've been selling 5 times more Buick cars in China than in the US themselves. And during a 13-year stretch, General Motors was selling more cars in China than in the US. It stopped recently with the rise of Chinese EVs, simply because General Motors, failed to make that strategic turn. They're a bit late on that. But there were no restrictions. To this day, there are no restrictions on American cars being sold in China. And when you walk around in China, you can see, McDonald's, Starbucks, KFCs, all of that on every street corner. You see Apple stores everywhere. I mean, that's not the problem. The problem is exactly what you said, Mitch. The problem is exactly what you said. But somehow Trump is identifying this first thing as the problem and solving for an inexistent issue. So that's really what I have trouble with here.
Yeah, I mean, I want to chime in here. So I think all of us are on the same agreement here. I mean, for example, if BYD is going to come to the US, do a 50-50 joint venture, they're going to build factories here, we're going to do that. I just see it very hard to pivot from where we're going down, right? I mean, you do still see a very anti-China rhetoric coming from the US government. I mean, this whole farmland thing is ridiculous, right? I mean, we just hear that, oh my gosh, the Chinese are buying farmland. It's a massive national security threat. It's close to U.S. bases. You look at the actual. I mean, I did a whole video on this. When you actually look at what they own, it's just such a small percentage. I mean, it's really not important at all. And the vast majority of it comes from Smithfield, which is the largest pork factory in the United States. That's like the majority of the acreage that is owned by Chinese is owned by that one plant. And then what do? They basically bought it to export back to China, to get quality American pork back to China. So, I mean, it's not like it's there's nothing wrong with that, but yet it's how it's painted into our American society. I mean, we have a very anti-China rhetoric. I mean, we see every single week. I mean, look at SCMP. Every week you log in, it's, this world-renowned scientist is now left America going back to China. This world-renowned physicist and biologist and all of these people are going back to China. I just find it hard to pivot. I just find, we've been going down this road where painting China is the problem. And, so it's going to be interesting to see, what comes of the Switzerland meeting. I think you're going to see, kind of going back to our trade war, I think you're going to see a pivot from the Trump presidency here. I think this 145% tariff, like you said, Mitch, anything over 50% is essentially an embargo. So I think you're going to have to see them kind of reverse this and kind of save face a little bit and realize that this is going to bite the U.S. very hard in the next few weeks and months. So I think you're going to see a somewhat of a reset. And I mean, I'm glad that the leaders are talking. I'm glad that we're having a live stream today. I mean, dialogue is what's needed. But I find it. I agree with Arnaud here that it's going to be very hard to go that direction given the rhetoric that we're hearing from the White House and Trump's leaders.
Chemotherapy is painful, man. I mean, nobody ever said it was easy, but cancer is even more painful. So I don't know. Like, what are you going to do? Give me a better idea. Who's got a better idea on how you address these problems? You got to rebalance an economy. You've got to do a lot of things to try to reemphasize the need for middle class. What do you do?
I mean, your ideas are great, but I think your ideas are perfect. It's more Trump. What he is doing, that's not, he's not going in that direction.
Yeah,
so I think
that's the issue, right? Like you're advocating for chemo, which I agree, but Trump's not doing that. Trump and you are not aligned. That's the issue. You guys are.
No. I don't know. I don't agree with that. I think we're aligned if you step back. I mean, it depends on how close you look at it. I think that he's very much. He said, by the way, he has said since he entered office that he's open to bringing in Chinese investment into factories, and he is the U.S. desk officer on China now, not anybody else. So the fact is, like, if he could pivot very quickly, he's one guy. He could pivot, and then the entire
So let's say he goes down to a Chinese factory and cut the ribbon and says, this is going to work, and there will be no political opposition to that.
There you go. There you go. You got to step back. You got to, again, you got to step back and look at things. But I don't disagree. The context here is very key. The truth is everything you guys are saying is right, but the context is, it might create a different result.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I think it's fantastic. Well, we're coming up to 90 minutes here on the stream, and I think that's a good ending point here. I want to thank you all for your time today. And what I'm going to do is let's just go around, and we're going to give everybody one final word, maybe 30, 40 seconds here just to kind of have a little closing statement, and then we'll end our stream. And I think it was a great chat. And I mean, again, I think all of us agree we're pro-dialogue, we're pro-engagement. We've had a very nice comment section here today where people are very interested in what we're talking about. And again, and I love this discussion, Mitch. I love being able to push back a little bit back. And, we're not again, the goal is not to get us all in here and complimenting each other and basically saying the same things. That brings no value to the discussion. So, gentlemen, let's definitely do this again. But Mitch, kind of close us out here with some final thoughts.
Well, first of all, happy Mother's Day to my dear mom, to my sisters who are both mothers, and of course, especially to my lovely wife, who we have an almost 9-month-old baby, and wishing you guys a wonderful Mother's Day.
Nice.
My thoughts are definitely that this is a work in progress. That we're going to have to see what happens. We're going to have to watch things. That Trump has taken a lot of la mienne and thrown it against the wall to see what'll stick. And some of it's going to stick and some of it's not. And that's okay. I think that's part of his program. I wouldn't get over concerned about, the politics here. I think that works out because he's got a lot of control over the outcomes. I think that China definitely is sympathetic to a lot of the things he's trying to do, whether they say it or not, because it's exactly what they did. They can't really argue with tariffs. They use tariffs to get to where they are. And I think there's a lot of reason for some, maybe not optimism, but something other than just the abject pessimism that we're hearing from the mainstream. I personally love the fact that the entire pundit world is all against this, because that tells me that, as an entrepreneur, that tells me that's an opportunity. Usually things are never so black and white. If everyone thinks that this is a bad idea, that tells me that it's probably not entirely a bad idea, because if it was entirely a bad idea, you'd have a lot of people in agreement and a lot of people in disagreement. Then I know, one side is totally wrong. But if everyone is agreed on it, now that tells me that we got an opportunity. Thanks so much for organizing this side. This has been a great discussion, and I'm so grateful and proud to be on a panel with you and Zichen and Arnaud, three people that I admire very much.
Absolutely. Arnaud, send us off with the final thoughts.
So I would say, taking a step back, I think probably something that will definitely help in all of this. I think at the end of the day, hostility and tensions and so on often stems from ignorance. And I think that, we've seen in the US and maybe also a bit in China, I mean, both sides are taking a bit of distance from each other, especially the US from China. And as a result, there is less and less people exchange, less and less knowledge of China in the US, which leads to more and more hostility and false rhetoric and so on and so forth. So, what I am seeing from Trump is, I think he clearly wants to do what's right for the US, but I think he's also in many ways victim of that, of the general ignorance of China in the US and of a lot of fake news. So I think that at first with his tariffs, he probably did think that it will, bring China to the table, for instance, that he had much more leverage than he did with China. And I think he was surprised that China, reacted the way they did, saying, responding by increasing tariffs of their own, by retaliating and saying, we don't actually need US trade. I think that was a surprise for Trump, but it shouldn't have been, because anyone who knows China would understand that US trade is actually not that important. It's less than 3% of their GDP. And there is also a lot of question around national pride and so on. And so, of course, they will respond this way. And now when Trump is saying that we need to sell more US goods in China, that clearly stems from ignorance as well, because actually when you go to China, you see American brands everywhere. So I think he wants to do the right thing for the US. Maybe like Mitch is saying, he put his fingers on some of the right points, but the way he goes about it, I'm convinced is the wrong way, and that stems partly from ignorance of China, which is the result of all this hostility and this increasing, de-risking / decoupling. So the solution, to me, taking a step back, it's actually to increase the knowledge of China in the US, which will lead to more constructive actions that would actually solve America's problems.
Fantastic. Zichen, send us off.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here, with Cyrus hosting us and to talk with Mitch and Arnaud. I really learned a lot from you. I think what we have discussed at length about, what is the status of the U.S. economy, what is prompting President Trump and his administration to do this. And, the U.S. obviously needs some sort of rebalancing and its own development strategy. But as the only Chinese mainland national on the panel, let me also say, perhaps we haven't time to go to this. The Chinese economy, should the tariffs also, remain in place for extended period of time, there will be costs to the Chinese economy as well, and that the Chinese economy has its need to rebalance as well, and it is on that process. And for many of, most of the keen China watchers know, China initiated the so-called dual circulation strategy a few years ago. So basically emphasizing its domestic economic circulation, which means to put the domestic market and the domestic demand at a higher emphasis, at the top of the economic development agenda. So, but it is a long process. It's going to take policy commitment. It's going to take fiscal spending. It's going to take, beefing up the social security and medical insurance, and more transfer of income to the ordinary households. And it's going to take, time. And so the Chinese also have to rebalance its economy, and it is in the process of doing that. And so I just want to, as a Chinese mainland national, also to talk a little bit on that, instead of, it seems like we're all just criticizing the United States. That may not be, the most fair thing to do here. And I think at the end of the day, there is still a lot that the two countries can work together on, whether on global, global health, whether on maybe help the United States to reindustrialize to a certain degree, and to help build up resilience in the West as well, to have more people-to-people exchanges, and to have more Mitch Presnicks in China to start great American businesses, and I think there is actually a lot of room for cooperation, for collaboration, and even just on the economic, and not everything should be considered from the national security perspective. I understand the resilience argument, right? During the COVID, you don't want. Nobody wants to be in a position where you can't even manufacture basic masks, and so some sort of resilience is surely desired. But at the same time, I think the economic globalization, to have basically more division of labor and companies working together, well, that's certainly not trending anymore at this day and age. But I do think there is still a lot to gain from future corporations. And for friends who are watching this, if you are in, I guess, the Europe, many of the countries that have already got visa-free travels to China, you can just hop on a plane and land in China. And for many other countries, there is actually a 10-day transit visa. So meaning that, for example, you fly to China from A country and then exit China to B country, and you book all the tickets in advance. And if your country falls within the category of the countries afforded this privilege, and there are many of them, including the United States, you can spend 240 hours, which is 10 days in the Chinese mainland. I think you're hearing the four of us talking about China relentlessly, and we've all spent a lot of time in China, but it would be better for you to check it out by yourself, to see the facts on the ground. And compared to, let's say, the Europe and North America, China is actually much more affordable. And I mean, you can visit tier 2 and tier 3 cities, not just Beijing and Shanghai, which is quite expensive, but go there, check it out. It's the beautiful summer is coming, and many people are taking their summer vacations. Go check it out. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to our next discussions.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. We've been talking about this for a long time. It is finally nice to be able to bring you all on the channel to start off our collaboration. And we'll definitely run it back again, have some more chats, because I think dialogue is what's needed. All of us are pro-engagement, pro-dialogue. And I want to thank everybody for being in here. We've had hundreds of comments, thousands of people joining us here live this morning here on YouTube. I want to thank you all for your time. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here on YouTube with us, listening to this discussion, and we really appreciate it. Love the message for Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And we look forward to seeing you all in our next live stream soon. Thank you so much, and take care.
Thank you.
Peace. See you guys.
See you.